friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and in today's video I wanted to offer a little bit of encouragement for people who are doing a pantry challenge. Either you're doing the Three Rivers challenge along with several of us here on YouTube or on Instagram, or maybe you're doing some kind of other pantry challenge on your own. And I just kind of wanted to talk about some of the common myths about seasonal eating and eating in this way, and just address some of the concerns people have about not having access to fresh foods during a pantry challenge. So if that's something that interests you, why don't you stick around? Okay, so I guess the first thing we need to address is the idea of what is considered fresh. To me, fresh is something that I would go out into my backyard, pull directly out of my garden, and eat. I would eat it fresh and raw, and all of the nutrients are there. It's like a perfect food, right? That's very different than what I have available to me in a grocery store in Ohio in the middle of winter. In our climate here, there is very little that we can grow this time of year. There is very little food that's actually in season. Now, if I had a greenhouse or some kind of cold frames, I could grow greens. I might be able to grow some brassicas. I might even be able to manage some hardier lettuce that I could grow over the winter here. I could have fresh carrots that are out in the ground, and turnips and other root vegetables that I could pull out and harvest fresh and raw and eat as needed. But for the vast majority of produce, it isn't going to grow even with a greenhouse here in Ohio in the middle of December. Okay, so if I, in the middle of January now, were to go to the grocery store here in Ohio and select a bunch of produce, I could call that fresh produce, but is it really? A lot of it was grown overseas, or maybe somewhere down south like in Mexico where there's a warmer climate, and a lot of it was picked underripe, because if they picked it when it was fully ripe, it wouldn't make it here to Ohio in time before it was overripe. So they pick it when it's underripe, so then it's void of a lot of nutrition because it didn't get the chance to grow to its potential. It ripens artificially during the shipping process, and that shipping process can take days, maybe a week or more, to make it to the grocery shelf. I go to the grocery, I pick my produce, I bring it home, and then it may be several more days before I even prepare that produce for whatever meal it is, if I'm shopping, a week at a time. And so by the time it goes from farm to table, you're looking at a week or more that produce does degrade over time. It loses nutrients during the oxidation process. So there's a big difference between fresh produce out of your garden and what you have access to in the winter in a grocery store. What you have access in a grocery store is raw produce in the winter. It isn't necessarily fresh produce. And so I guess there are some people that believe then that you have to have access to raw produce in the winter in order to be healthy. But that isn't necessarily the case. Let's talk about why. If you go grow a garden, or if you shop locally for your produce at a farmer's market, and that farmer picked that produce the morning of the farmer's market, it brought it to the market, you went and bought it, or if you went out to your garden in the morning, you picked the produce fresh, you bring it inside your house, you wash it, and you immediately preserve and process it. You picked it at peak ripeness, so it had its full potential of nutrients. You flash froze it, preserved it, canned it right away, so there is a small amount of nutrient loss in the blanching process before freezing or in the heating process of canning, but then you've retained the nutrition of it and it's there, and that's available for you. By the time in the winter you get that raw produce from the grocery store and then heat it to cook it, or even put it in a salad or whatever, when you think about the amount of nutrition that has been lost over the course of time, it's very comparable to the amount of nutrition that is in that freshly preserved item that's sitting in the jar. So in terms of the vitamin content and the mineral content and all of that, there isn't much difference between preserved produce that was picked fresh and raw produce in winter that is grown really far away and shipped and then eaten a week or more after harvest. Same amount of vitamins and minerals. One just lost a lot through the preservation process immediately. One lost a lot of vitamins because it was picked underripe and because it's been so long since harvest before you're actually going to eat that item. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. So in terms of nutrients, I just wanted to encourage you, if you're someone that's eating a lot of preserved produce in the winter because of a pantry challenge, in terms of vitamins and minerals, you are not really missing out on much. It's more of a preference thing at that point. Some people prefer raw produce. They don't enjoy the taste or the texture of preserved produce. That's a whole different ballgame, and I can understand. And so if that's the case, in future pantry challenges, there is a lot of produce that you can store raw. We have raw carrots and raw apples in our overflow fridge. We have raw onions, raw garlic. We can grow fresh greens and sprouts in our windowsill, and we can have those available. There's raw potatoes that store really well over the winter, cabbages, things like that. And I just want to remind you that if you go to the grocery store in Ohio in January and you get apples from the grocery store, remember that those were harvested back in the fall, because that's when apple season is. Those aren't any fresher than apples that you would have sitting in a root cellar that you harvested yourself from your property or from a friend's property and that are sitting in storage at home. They're both just as old. The difference is that generally the stuff in the grocery store has been sprayed with a waxy coating to make it hold up better, whereas the stuff that is fresh off your trees might not have the appearance of that, kind of waxy coating on the outside. So anyways, hopefully that makes some sense. But what I want to do is help you. If you're someone that needs fresh food, here is some information. This week I've been growing sprouts in my windowsill here, and I'm going to show you how to start that process and kind of the steps on how you make that happen. So hopefully this is helpful. I'm using a sprouting mix from Azure Standard. This is alfalfa, clover, broccoli, and radish seeds. These are not garden seeds. They're special seeds for sprouting. That's important. And then you just need a glass jar. I use a quart-size canning jar, and then I use a sprouting lid. If you don't have a special sprouting lid, you can just use some cheesecloth, and then one of your canning rings would work just fine. You just need something to put over the top to help drain the water out of the jar. So then what we're going to do is put 3 tablespoons of the sprouting seeds into the bottom of my quart jar here. You don't want to overfill, so anywhere between 2 to 3 tablespoons is perfect for a quart. And then you're just going to fill it up with your water here. I just use regular well water. It doesn't need to be filtered. And oops, this is really hard to do one-handed. But anyways, you're just going to fill it with water and then get your lid on top. There we go. There we get it on top. And then this jar is just going to sit for 24 hours. That's it. That's all we do for the first day. And then the next day when we wake up, what we're going to do is take our jar and we're going to completely dump all of the water out like this. And then we're going to fill the jar back up with water, kind of swirl it around, and this is called rinsing. And then we're going to empty these seeds, or empty the water again. And then we're just going to place that jar kind of at an angle in a clean bowl in our windowsill. You just want to have some light and warmth there to let these sprout. That's it for day 2. That's all we're going to do. Just let these sit here in the windowsill. So after the first day, you're going to start seeing little tiny white tails. I don't know if you can see it through the jar. It's really hard to get it to focus. But the seeds kind of get these little white tails on the back. They're beginning to sprout. And so what we're going to do every day, see the little tail? Every day after this, twice a day, at least twice a day, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to refill the whole jar with water. We're going to dump it out, and then we're going to put it back into the windowsill. And as the days go by, those little white tails are going to continue to grow into little sprouts that will eventually get leaves. So as you can see, just after 24 hours, you already have some wonderful growth here. Now it is important that you place your jar at an angle so that extra water can drain out. It's also important that you change out your bowl and that the bowl that you're going to place it in is clean. So I change that bowl every day. The one thing about sprouts is that it can harbor bad bacteria
There are cases of foodborne illness with sprouts because this wet, humid, moist environment can kind of trap bacteria like E. coli and salmonella. So everything needs to be clean, and you need to make sure, that's why it's important that you don't overpack that jar full of seeds, because eventually as these sprouts grow, they'll get so compacted in there that mold can kind of grow between them. These are going to continue to grow. This is after 3 days. I have one more day of growth, and in Sunday's video, I'll show you how these sprouts turn out. But it really is that simple to grow sprouts in your windowsill.
Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about here is the idea of fresh food being superior. And a lot of people apply that just in the area of produce. So they will criticize a seasonal diet of eating a lot of canned vegetables because they're only focusing on the produce. But what they fail to recognize is how people who eat seasonally or eat from a fully stocked homestead pantry are eating fresh foods in just about every other area. So we could talk about mayonnaise. Today I made fresh mayonnaise from fresh eggs I got in my backyard. My hens laid them yesterday. I brought them in and I made fresh mayonnaise directly from that. And that mayonnaise won't last forever like a Hellmann's mayonnaise or whatever, even some of the healthier organic mayonnaise that you could get at the grocery store that's full of stuff to keep it shelf stable. My mayonnaise is fresh. I make salad dressing from fresh ingredients the day I'm going to consume it. I grind my wheat berries fresh, and they're full of the nutrients that are freshly available versus stuff that is pre-ground and on the grocery store shelves. So many items like that I guess if you're going to be under the assumption that only fresh food is good for you, that doesn't make sense if all you're eating fresh is fruits and vegetables and everything else in your pantry is full of preservatives and isn't fresh. Does that make sense? So I guess we need to apply that standard across the board. And my thinking is that it's okay not to have everything fresh. So while I make my mayonnaise fresh, I eat my fruit a lot of times in a jar. And you know what? It all balances out and it's okay. So eating seasonally is just how our ancestors, how civilization operated since the beginning of time. You ate what was available to you in the season that you're in. If you live in a colder climate, you prepare for that by preserving what you can or storing up en route vegetables, but you make it work. And thankfully, God provided a lot of nutrient-dense foods that aren't fruits and vegetables. So that is my other point I want to make in this. If you're under the assumption that you have to have raw fruits and veggies in order to get all the nutrients that you need in your diet, I would challenge you to do some research on something like organ meat or a homegrown egg or beef tallow as a cooking fat or canned fish. Any one of those items right there is more nutrient dense and is higher in minerals and vitamins than a salad from the grocery store in Ohio in the middle of winter. So you can supplement. If you're not eating a lot of vegetables, just make sure you're getting some healthy organ meat or some canned fish. Make sure that you're doing your best. Nobody's diet is going to be perfect, but I just want to, I guess, make the point that this is how people ate since the beginning of time, and I wouldn't necessarily say that eating raw, underripe produce from the grocery store is going to make you any healthier than someone who grew a garden full of fresh produce and preserved it and is trying to eat off that during the non-growing season. Nutrition aside, there are a lot of benefits to eating seasonally. It's better for the environment to eat what you can find around you in season and then preserve it for the times it's not available. You're not relying on things needing to be shipped halfway across the world in order to feed you, so that's better for the environment. It helps support local economies. You're supporting your local farms by purchasing in bulk from them when they have things available and then preserving it for the off season. So I just feel like a lot of the problems that we have in our world right now in terms of the environment, in terms of economics, in terms of nutrition, could be solved if we got back to eating seasonally and viewing food a little differently. So Hopefully that made sense. Regardless of how you choose to eat, I'm not knocking people who eat produce from the grocery store in winter. When we're not doing a pantry challenge, when it was back in December, we were still shopping and getting some produce from the grocery store every week too. We do it, but I'm just not under the assumption that produce is any better for me than what is available here in my house. It's a texture preference. So sometimes it's fun to crunch on raw vegetables, and sometimes it's nice to have canned vegetables. And right now during a pantry challenge, this is what we're relying on. All right, I could ramble on all day about this topic. You guys know I love to talk about this. Hopefully you guys are having fun on your pantry challenge. You're saving lots of money. You're coming up with some fun foods to eat. And make sure you check out my video coming out this Sunday. I'll be sharing all the rest of our meals from this week. I'll also have the conclusion of my sprouts tutorial to show you how that turned out. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And I hope you're having a great week, friends. I'll see you later.